Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Job, and we are in chapter 26 right now. And chapter 26 begins a fairly lengthy response by Job, and it follows the final discourse of Bildad, which we covered yesterday. And Bildad basically says to Job that, God is in control of everything. And if anything happens to you, well, too bad. I mean, that is what God is doing, and it is judging the world. And bad things happen to others, and you happen to be in it. And so it is like leaving everything to what Job actually said, because Job is resigning to the fact that, yes, God is in control, yet things have been left to its natural order, and God is not paying attention to the individuals. And so now we continue in chapter 26, and then this would be, and then that would be after Bildad's discourse in chapter 25. Job responded. Now, in this case, you find that there are two words here. Job answered, and he actually answered Bildad and said, right? And then he said these things. And that's from verse 2 onwards. And so you find that, as I mentioned to you before, from chapter 3 onwards, all the way to chapter 42, at least the first part of it, much of what we're going to read is very poetic in the way that it presents itself. And so it is fairly challenging to actually translate the book of Job whenever it is in a more poetic form, but we will try. Verse 2, it says, "What a help you are to the weak." The the words here should probably read this way. How have you helped the one who has no strength? Well, as you can see, the translation is slightly different. Uh, And that's because we are unable to see that in the English. This is supposed to be an A and a B. Now, A and B are what we call parallelisms, two statements that actually say and emphasize the same issue, same thing. So let me just help us understand this. The first part here, the word weak, is no strength. That's all it means. What help are you? How are you going to help? How are you going to support the one who has no strength, the one who needs help? The second part here tells us this. It is also a bit difficult here. You have saved the arm without strength. It would be better translated as, how have you saved the arm that has no power? And thereby you can see an A and a B. So this word here, saved or delivered, the arm that has no strength in this case is better translated as in might or power. And so by explaining it this way in the English, it is basically I would say, a form of sarcasm that Job is being sarcastic to Bildad. It says, after you've said all these things, what help does it do? What help does it do to me, for example, Job, right? Job was wealthy. He had a large family. He had health. And all these is gone. So, what good is the philosophical arguments that Bildad and his friends Eliphaz, uh, as well as Zophar, would have said? And so this should be read as a sarcasm. What good is it that you've said all these things? I am weak. I have lost my wealth. I've lost my family. I've lost my health. And you're saying all these things to me. What good is it? How can it help me? How can it save me? How can it deliver me? That would be verse 2. Now going to verse 3, it says, what advice have you given to one without wisdom? What helpful insight have you abundantly provided? So let me just pick up a little bit of the Hebrew here. The first word is advice, that's counsel. What counsel have you given to one that has no wisdom? That has no wisdom. Given to one that has no wisdom, that means without. And it is necessary in general life that when somebody helps another, when somebody gives advice, it is to add to knowledge, right? Counsel or advice is to add to knowledge because a person doesn't have. So by giving advice or counsel, you're adding to the knowledge. So the question is this: what helpful insight uh, have you abundantly provided? Meaning you have dispensed knowledge, dispensed counsel. Insight here is really knowledge. What helpful knowledge have you, well, in this way, sound knowledge? What sound knowledge have you abundantly provided for others to know more? So you find that this would be another A and a B, and this is about adding knowledge. Adding knowledge. So now, Bildad, after you've said all these things, what have I learned more? Now, obviously, these are all sarcasm and it's rhetorical, and the answer is none. Nothing. You have not said a single word that has enhanced my knowledge of my situation, enhanced my knowledge of what I can see in my particular environment. Verse 4, to whom have you uttered words? To whom have you spoken or reported things? And these would be implied new words or new ideas, right? And whose spirit was expressed through you. Now, this word here, the word spirit, as you can see, this is neshama, and it would be better expressed as breath. Whose breath has gone out. This gives us a bit of a picture of Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, that God breathed into Adam after he formed him from the dust of the Adamah and breathed into his nostril the breath of life. And that would be the Neshama. And so this gives us the idea here that to whose spirit, if Bildad had actually breathed out new life. And that is all poetic, right? Nothing new. So what is new? Nothing. That is the sarcasm that's coming out from Job chapter 26. Now in verse 5, it says something which is quite interesting. The departed spirits. The word departed spirits is an idea here, which you can say that these would be the deceased. The deceased are made to tremble. The deceased are made to, well, we could say, I guess we could say tremble, be stirred, I guess, be stirred underneath the waters and those who dwell there. And these are the dwellers under the waters. Now, the idea here is these are a picture of the departed. And so some looks at the grave, some looks at the waters, and both the land and the water contains the dead. That would be a picture. So the deceased are made to stir under the waters with their inhabitants, and these are together with the dead. Verse 6, Sheol is naked before him, and Abaddon has no covering. Let's take a look at the translation. I think the translation is a bit challenging. Sheol, as is seen, would be seen as the grave. The grave is completely naked. Naked means uncovered, bare. Before God. And there is no covering for the doom. The word Abaddon here is doom. It's not a name, right? Abaddon is destruction, ruin, destruction. And so this is beginning to describe God, that it is apparent. Everything is apparent to God. He can see beyond the grave. Nothing is hidden from God. And so from verse 6 onwards, we are beginning to cover a very interesting, how should we say, um, an understanding from Job. We have been hearing from the friends, but verse 6 onwards, and well, I guess verse 5 onwards, all the way to the end, is a description of Job's view of God. Now, why is this important? Is this? Remember, God described Job as somebody who is blameless, who is upright, who is God-fearing, who shuns all evil. And here you can see that the character of Job lends itself to the view of God. Otherwise, Job would not behave this way if he doesn't know God in this particular way. And so from verse 5, 6, 7, 8 onwards, we begin to see a brief glimpse of the mind of Job with regards to God, because his friends, Eliphaz, Zophar, and yesterday Bildad, has been emphasizing and extolling God, and then putting man down into such low level that it has no meaning and that man has no right to even ask God. And at the end of yesterday, I had highlighted to us that that is not the right way of looking at things. Job, being blameless, upright, God fearing, and shuns all evil, has a right to ask what is really happening. His knowledge of God would be very interesting to us. And so we begin as we look at verse 7. Verse 7 tells us about how Job sees God. It says he stretches out the Zaphon. Now, this word is north, north as Zaphon, over Tohu. This word is Tohu. It comes from Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. Over void, over something which it's difficult to describe. It is empty, right? Over empty space, over Tohu. Empty means it is just, I guess, space. And so when he looks up to the north, this is Zaphon, that says, God, he looks up to the north. So let me just draw you this picture. He looks up to the north, and all he sees is space. Right? Space. With no stars. Right? Just space with no stars. That is the picture. It says God has stretched it out over an empty space. So you could just say that empty space, and this is a good translation, over Tohu. And then he says he hangs. This word hang by itself means to, I guess you could say, if you have a picture, then you find that it is hanging over a peg. So this is hanging. So it's literally like saying, in a more poetic form, he takes the earth or the land that he is standing on and hangs it in this empty space. And this word hang literally means to put the earth, and if you can use this as the earth, let me redraw this picture as the earth. And the picture is that as if God hung this in empty space upon nothing. Now, this word here is nothing, right? Nothing of what? Now, this is a very strange expression in the English. I'm just giving you the literal translation because this idea of empty space is the same as nothing of what? What do you mean, nothing of what? It means that Job doesn't know what's out there. It is a lot of nothingness, you could say that, because it is it's hanging on a space where he doesn't see any stars. And so we see this as an A and a B. He looks up, there is nothing. So this is nothing. And so he said, God hung this land or earth, if we call it, over this nothingness. And nothing of what? It means that he doesn't know. And so one of the things that you find is that in the Hebrew language is a very concrete language. When he doesn't know, he doesn't know. And so the Bible uses words like ma. And so it is a balima. Balima means over nothing of don't know what. That would be a way of expressing Job 26 verse 7. Now he goes on to say, verse 8, he wraps up the waters in his clouds, and the cloud does not burst under them. Now, this word wrap, the word wrap literally means binds up. Binds up, right? Instead of wrap up, he binds up, he bundles up water in his clouds. And Job looks up and there are clouds in the sky. Right? Clouds in the sky. And he knows there is water. Why? Because when the time comes, there is rain. So there is water up there, but it is not coming out yet. And yet the cloud does not burst under them. The idea of burst means split open. It's like Moses striking the rock and the rock splits open and water bursts out. And so he says the cloud doesn't burst out under them. Under them means not about the weight, but in the underside. So which means that Job is looking up. This is the underside of the cloud, and the cloud doesn't break apart. That is his view. And so God is able to take water and put it up there. So we continue with Job's view of God. And so he says in verse 9, he obscures the face of the full moon and spreads his cloud over it. Now we have a challenge here. It says here, he obscures. The word obscure here is to, how should we say, enclose, right? Enclose. He walls up. The face of the word full moon that is translated full moon is really not full moon. This literally means the face of the throne. Okay, so let me just strike this out first. And the idea of throne here is the word seat, and that's kisa. Literally, it means the seat of honor. And so he looks up there, and the translator gives us a translation called full moon. So this is a translation. Or better still, it's an interpretation. Now, we can't help it because translators have to interpret some of these difficult words. But literally, it reads this: he walls up the face of the throne. He spreads his cloud over it. And so the translator uses the word full moon instead of the word throne. And I guess that would be the way that the translators look at it. And so this idea here is The word throne may be a metaphorical word for the heavens. And so when Job looks up, what does he see? And so you can say that he sees clouds in the skies, right? In the skies. And God spreads his clouds over the skies to hide the skies. And that is what verse 9 actually means. And this would be an A and a B. It's about hiding the skies, hiding the heavens. Verse 10, he says, he inscribed a circle on the surface of the waters at the boundary of light and darkness. Now, remember, this is very much a vivid, poetic way of expression. And so you could say that he drew a boundary. Now, this word inscribe a circle. Inscribe a circle, you could say he drew a boundary. Now, inscribe a circle is not wrong, but it's a more modern way of expressing it. And it says that he drew a boundary upon the face. And this you could read in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, over the face of the waters. And so, what it literally means is you find that if this was water, and this is water, what the verse actually means is that God actually drew a boundary. And this is a boundary. And we call this the horizon. And so this is a picture of the horizon. And it says here, this is at the boundary of light and darkness. So it says until light and darkness come into perfection or completeness. So let me just explain this. So you find that in the horizon, this would be light. When the sun comes up, right? When the sun comes out, you have light. And then on the water itself, if you recall in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, this is darkness upon the waters. And this is darkness. And hence we have this line here. God drew a line. And so verse 10 talks about their horizon between light and darkness, on the surface of the waters. So this is really like looking into the ocean floor, the sea itself, which is dark. Moving on, verse 11, because this is really describing the creation of God, and Job is describing, you see, you look into the sea, there is a line, there is a division between light and darkness. Right at the end of the sea doesn't go away, doesn't rise up. There is a boundary, there is a line, and that would be the horizon. Verse 11, the pillars of heaven tremble and are amazed at his rebuke. So it says here, the pillars of heaven, the word tremble here is to shake. It is to rock. And they are amazed. And the word amazed here is astounded. Astounded. They are stunned. They are dumbfounded. I would say they are shocked. And this is Job's view of God, that the pillars of heaven is actually the earth. And so if we see the heavens, the pillars of heavens would be here. You have the mountains, and then we have the clouds. And so when Job looks up, he could see the height of the mountains, and it's covered by clouds. And so these are the pillars of heaven, and the pillars of heaven tremble, they shake, they rock. And these pillars of heavens, which is the earth itself, is shocked at the rebuke of God. That gives us a picture of earthquakes. The earth trembles and rock, and this is in the mind of the ancients, right? Like the mind of Job. When there is an earthquake, God is angry. God is rebuking the earth. And that is why the pillars of heaven will shake. The mountains will shake. The earth will rock and tremble. And that would be the idea that we can read here. Verse 12. Verse 12 tells us this: with his power he quieted the sea, and by his understanding he shattered. And this word here, Rahav, then we have to actually understand this a little bit. Now, let us take a look at this. With his strength, he, well, this word doesn't mean uh quieted, actually. Uh this word actually uh split. I think that would be a better word, to split the sea, the ocean. And by his understanding, he shatters his pride. And so this talks about the sea itself, how mighty the sea may be, and God can quieten it down and break its pride because of how high the sea can be, and it can be shattered. And that is a very graphic imagery, that God can still the ocean. He can split the ocean. He can still the ocean, as much as the ocean itself demonstrates the pride in the waves, in the high waves. We look at the last two verses. Verse 13 says, by his breath, the heavens are cleared. Let me just explain this word. By his breath, this would be, uh, in terms of the word, this is this word here. This is ruach. By his breath, by his wind, the heavens were, and the word here is not clear. Uh, it is, I guess, it gives us a picture of stirring. the idea of stirring, right? Are stirred. By his hand. And now this word here is not, well, I guess the word can be understand as pierce, but you could actually say that it is, how should we say this? This word is halal. And the idea of halal is to make common. Make common. Make common. The fleeing serpent. Now, in a literal way, many may think that this may sound like a monster. But actually, if you take a look at this as an A and a B, this is very much like Job looking up into the heavens by night, and he can actually look at the sky being very dark, right? And in the dark sky, he can actually see stars, right? And that is the picture that he's looking at. And what this means is very likely not a sea monster, but possibly some starry formation. Now, some commentators has it as the Milky Way, but I would call it a starry formation because it is the fact that God can put all these things in place and it looks magnificent to man, and yet to God, it is something very common. It's a run of the mill thing to God. No big deal. Uh, as the heavens clear itself, when the clouds move away and you get a clear sky, right? You get a clear sky, which is this. You can look up there and you can see this fleeing serpent. Now, this fleeing serpent, by the way, is the word Nahash Bariak. It's just a word here, Nahash Bariak. And literally, this is a literal translation. But in a more metaphorical understanding that is describing a picture of the heavens, the Milky Way could be seen as the running serpent or the running dragon as the starry formation. Let's do the last verse right now, which is verse 14. And so he says, behold, these are the fringes of his ways. Now, this word here, the fringes, is katsa, and this would mean the tip. Now, in our modern day, we would say that this is the tip of the iceberg. And so in the ancient way, these are the tips or the wing tips of his ways. And Job is just saying that, all these things I've just described, this is just the little bit that we can see about God. Our next phrase. how faint a word we hear of him may be better translated as this. It says, what is the least we can understand about him? So this idea, what faint a word, basically what little. This is also a whisper. So you can understand that this is merely describing in a poetic form. This is the tip of the iceberg. This is the tip, the very end of the little bit that we can see. This is a little whisper that we can understand. And then the final one is, but his mighty thunder, who can understand? Now, this idea of thunder, mighty thunder, and the idea here is the peal, which is the sound of the thunder, really, not the thunder in itself. This is the sound of it, the sound of the great deeds. So it's not really mighty thunder, the peal or the sound of the great deeds of God. Who can understand? Now, this word understand comes from the idea of who can fathom, who can understand, who can teach, right? And so all of these are good words. Who knows all these things? And so let me just explain this to you, that this it would be a C. And let me just wrap it up by saying this. Verse 14, Job is literally saying, after I've said all these things about God, about his creation, about what he has done, about his powers, that he would shock us if we ever knew any more. If you look up to the skies, you can see the stars, and it's nothing to God. And so whatever I have described is nothing. This is just the tip of the iceberg of whatever God can do. These are the little whispers of what we can hear of him. This is the peal of the great deeds, like a thunderous sound about what God has done, which who can really understand? And so, in closing of chapter 26, Job describes his view of God. Remember, he is a blameless man, he is upright, he is God fearing, and he shuns all evil, and he sees God this way. Very different from Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, because his knowledge of God leads him to behave a certain way, to have this kind of a character that God is so pleased with that he presents Job to Hasatan to test Job, but not his three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, who came to console him. And so we don't know the background of these three friends, but we know of Job. And so it is important for us then to pay attention to how Job looks at God that led him to be blameless, upright, God-fearing, and shuns evil. And that's why we're going to spend some time on the next couple of chapters that Job is using to defend himself, express his ideas of God, and contrast that to his three friends. And now you are beginning to see that the imagery of God in Job's mind is really very appealing, very concrete. He's very clear in his mind who God is. And with this, we come to the end of chapter 26.